All right, welcome. Today we're jumping into a super important and kind of tricky part of contract law that you're almost guaranteed to see on an exam. It's all about this one question. Can you get paid extra for doing something you were already supposed to do? You might think the answer is obvious, but trust me, it has some wild twists. Let's get right into it. So let's frame the whole problem with this simple question. Imagine you've already got a contract to do a job for a set price. Or let's say you have a public duty, something the law requires of you. Can you then turn around and ask for more money just to finish that exact same job? I mean, on the surface, it sounds like a big no, right? But in law, the simple answer is rarely the whole story. And yeah, the starting point, the big foundational rule, is exactly what you'd think. No. Generally speaking, the law says performing a duty you already have is not valid consideration for a new promise. You can't use the same work to get paid twice. But hey, this is an exam review, and what are exams all about? The exceptions. So let's break them down. Okay, we're going to slice this into two distinct parts. First up, what happens when your existing obligation is a public duty? We're talking about things the law demands from you as a citizen. A police officer's duty to protect and serve, or a witness's legal duty to show up and testify in court. So let's look at our first key case, Collins v. Godefroy. Here's the story. Collins gets a subpoena, which is a legal order to testify in court. The defendant in that case, Godefroy, comes to him and promises to pay him to make sure he shows up. Collins testifies, but then Godefroy refuses to pay up. The court had to decide, was that promise of payment a real contract? And they said no. Why? Because Collins was already legally required by that subpoena to be there. He wasn't doing anything extra. He was just doing his public duty. He hadn't provided any fresh consideration for Godefroy's promise. And that case really nails down the core principle for us. The big takeaway from Collins is this. Just doing the bare minimum of what the law requires of you isn't something you can bargain with. There's no new deal because you haven't given anything new. But what if you do more than the bare minimum? This brings us to the crucial exception case, Glasbrook Bros. Picture this. There's a really tense miners' strike, and the mine owners are worried. They ask the local police for a full-time stationary guard right there on their property. The police say, whoa, hold on. Our public duty is just to patrol the area and respond to calls. What you're asking for is extra. The mine owners agree and promise to pay for this special service. Later, they try to back out, but the court said, nope, you have to pay. The police had provided valid consideration because they went above and beyond their normal public duty. And that gives us our first critical test for your exams. For public duties, you have to ask one simple question. Did the person exceed their existing obligation? If they just did what they were already supposed to do, that's Collins v. Godefroy, and there's no consideration. But if they went above and beyond, that's Glasbrook Bros, and that is good consideration. So that's public duties. Now, let's shift gears to our second scenario. What happens when your duty comes from a contract you already have with the very same person who's now promising you more money? This is where things get even more interesting. The classic case here is a fantastic story from the age of sail, Stilk v. Myrick. So a ship is sailing from London to the Baltic and back. Partway through the voyage, two sailors desert. The captain is in a tough spot. He promises the rest of the crew that if they just work the ship back home, he'll split the deserters' wages among them. They agree and sail the ship back. But when they get to London, the captain refuses to pay the extra money. The court sided with the captain. They said the crew was already contractually bound to do everything necessary to complete the voyage, including handling emergencies, like a couple of guys deserting. They were only doing what they'd already been paid to do. So you see the parallel here, right? The old school rule for contractual duties looks a lot like the rule for public duties. Promising to do the exact thing your contract already says you have to do is not fresh consideration. But this is where modern contract law decided to evolve. Now let's get to the modern game changer, Williams v. Roffey. Roffey was a main contractor renovating some apartments, and he hired Williams as a subcontractor to do the carpentry. Here's the catch. Roffey's main contract had a penalty clause. If he finished late, he'd have to pay a big fine. Williams started the work, but ran into financial trouble and couldn't finish on time. Roffey was staring down that penalty clause and panicked. So he went to Williams and promised him extra money to get the job done on schedule. Now notice, Williams didn't promise to do more work, just to finish the work he was already supposed to do. But this time, the court said the promise was binding. The reason? Roffey got a practical benefit. By getting Williams to finish, he avoided that costly penalty, saved himself the headache of finding a new carpenter, and kept the project moving. And this case gave us a whole new test. The modern approach, thanks to Williams versus Rafi, isn't just about whether you did more work. It's about whether your promise to finish the job you're already doing provides the other person with a real-world, tangible, practical benefit. If it does, that can be enough to make their promise of extra pay a legally enforceable contract. Okay, let's pull all this together. This next part is absolutely crucial for your exam. You have to know and be able to explain the two different tests the courts use, because it all depends on what kind of existing duty we're talking about. This is where you really score the points. And here it is, the money slide. For a public duty, the test is straightforward. Did you exceed the duty? You have to go above and beyond, just like the police in Glassberg Bros. But for a contractual duty owed to the same party, the modern test is way more flexible. Did you provide a practical benefit? Think of Rafi, avoiding that penalty clause. This distinction is everything. Burn these two different tests and their key cases into your brain. So I'll leave you with a final thought to chew on. This practical benefit test, is it a brilliant modern tool that lets the law recognize commercial realities and enforce fair deals? Or is it just a clever workaround, a legal fiction that judges created to avoid the sometimes harsh and rigid old rule from Stilk v. Myrick? It's something worth thinking about. That's it for us today. Good luck with the revision.